Welcome back to The Pipeline for episode 3. Today, I'm joined by two awesome guests who are very familiar with Manat. They need no introduction, but nonetheless, today we have Keone, the CEO of Manat, and Kevin G, leading developer relations at Manat. Welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Danny.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure everyone in the community, everyone listening along here is familiar with both of you already. But would you mind giving a brief 1 to 2 sentence introduction, starting with Keone?
Sure thing. My name's Keone. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Manat Labs. We're building the Manat blockchain. Prior to Manat, I worked in the high-frequency trading space for about 10 years as a quant. I'll hand it off to Kevin.
Yeah, so my name's Kevin, doing developer relations here at Manat Labs. Previous Solana core dev, previous Apple AirPods. So my background's more like low-level systems engineering, and now transitioned over to developer relations with Manat. So.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting, and I'm excited to have you both on here. Two fantastic guests, and can't think of really anyone more knowledgeable to have on here. I want to kick it off with a question over to Keone. Why Manat? Why did you want to revamp the EVM in a climate where L2s and other scaling solutions are so popular?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when we started in early 2022, a lot of people asked us, like, why not build an L2? And our answer was the same then as it is now, which is that, we think that someone needs to focus on the execution stack, making EVM execution a lot more performant, introducing some optimizations like parallel execution, and then all of the things kind of behind the scenes that actually enable parallel execution to be really performant, such as high performance state database that's storing all the data in Merkle tree, while supporting access to many reads and writes in parallel at the same time. There are all these other bottlenecks in the actual Ethereum virtual machine that all need to get addressed as well. And in beginning of 2022, and I think true now as well, there weren't really that many people focusing on that aspect of the problem, relative to the amount of love that was going into different, like working on rollups or working on zero knowledge proofs or working on data availability, et cetera. And I think it's just it's another area of blockchain scaling that's really needed. And I think it's really needed in order to help the Ethereum virtual machine, which is ultimately the dominant standard for smart contracts with 98% of all TVL in crypto right now. It's just really important for someone to do that. So the mission has always kind of been the same. Also, I think there's the element of just, like, why did you go try to climb that mountain? Because it was there. It's just a really interesting, challenging problem to make the EVM a lot more performant. And I'm glad that our team started on this when we did, and that that we've made all the progress that we have made. Really excited to show it to the world in the coming months.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Keone said, like when I found out about Manat, right, like it was the first time coming from like a low-level systems engineer where I saw an EVM that like made my ears perk up, right? Because they really were taking this like fundamentals, first principles approach to the problem that like if you've been like a low-level systems engineer, it's like bread and butter. It's like what you're looking for in a problem, and you like where a lot of things with ZK and L2s are like still kind of theoretical open questions. A lot of the things that Manat's doing is like best practices, let's apply them to a blockchain. In 30 years of like really high performance computing, it takes like a specialized set of like team and knowledge to do this. And so to find a team that was willing to like, delve into these really fundamental problems at like a system level for the EVM was like very, very exciting.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. I certainly didn't mean to cut you off there, but that's the exact question I was going to ask. So I think these are exciting problems to be solving, but not only exciting, the ambitious nature of it really can't be understated. These are value propositions and upgrades that have not been brought to the EVM before. And to your point also, Kevin, I think this is a really unique team that you've begun to assemble here, Keone. Can you speak to that? What has been your approach to curating a team that's up to this challenge on all fronts?
Absolutely, yeah. And by the way, I got to give a quick shout out to the cats in Kevin's background. I love that they're making out earlier ago, and when you were talking about your ears perking up, I was just thinking about the cats with their ears. I've got a little How to Train Your Dragon, a toothless in my background, so he doesn't move around.
Their names are Timon and Pumbaa.
Oh, there you go. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the team, just feel really lucky to have an amazing group of folks on the engineering front, as well as on the growth, marketing, community building, business development front here at Monad Labs. We're about 25 people, which I think is, people always are surprised when they hear that, because I think, they're thinking like a layer one project probably team would be bigger than that. But it just really, it's our approach to trying to stay super lean, trying to stay incredibly laser focused on the problems that need to get solved. And then as time goes on, our team will grow. We need to grow in order to support the scale of adoption that we're trying to bring. Supporting developers takes, it's just a lot of effort. It's a lot of, there's no shortcuts really. And that's just going to require a broader set of skill sets and additional manpower. But for right now, we're at 25 people. I guess just to speak also to the kind of the kind of problems that we're solving on the engineering front, where most of the team is really folks that have a lot of experience building high performance, low latency systems. So a common pattern in developing really performant base layer systems like databases is you need expertise over the performance of the entire system. Sometimes you need to delve into kernel level to get the optimizations that you need. And Monad is basically, or at least one part of Monad, the blockchain, is actually a database. So when you think about like trying to design like a really performant MySQL or a really performant Postgres database, you're dealing with many threads all operating at the same time. You're dealing with the actual question of storage and like how to store the data on disk and how to keep the right data in the cache to deliver fast reads when it's a repeated query with some data that's already there. So just a lot of lower level details. And I guess before I ramble too much about our team here, I'll just say, yeah, really lucky to have our team, and more generally, feel really lucky to have an incredible community that is supporting the team in these early days and giving us encouragement every day to keep going forward.
It's really astonishing how many fronts need to come together to curate a lively and successful L1 ecosystem in particular. You have, of course, like the core team that's working on building this technology and solving these problems. And you have folks like Kevin who are working on bringing in new developers to build on top of that. I'd love to hear from Kevin as well. What are these value propositions for a builder to come check out Manat?
Yeah, I think very initially, it's like composability at its finest, right? And I think that's something we've lacked in a lot of blockchains today. Even Solana, your CPI depth, which is your cross-program unification depth, is only 3. Right, so you can only call into 3 smart contracts before you can't go any deeper. In the EVM, that's not a limit, but there's a limit practically because of gas. So things like account abstraction, when you start looking at actually implementing these on the base layer, like just the complexity of all the contracts you have to go through, like it ends up being like cost prohibitively expensive, even though you're trying to like abstract the fee payment away to someone else and something like that. And so like what really excites me about Manat is like, okay, like this is like a real system where you can compose like pretty much infinitely, you know, up to like the EVM limits, which are much, much higher than 3. And then you can also like do things like safety wise and just like actual like implementation wise, like with account abstraction and stuff, where you're not going to hit into like a bunch of gas limits when you just want to like actually create a cool app, right? So initially, I think that's going to be like the real value prop. Longer term, I think there's like being an L1, there's some like really cool things we can like look into experimenting and doing, and we're you know looking at some of these things. But like there are things like adding opcodes for BLS precompiles, right? That's kind of like not all that controversial, but like base EVM may not want to do it, but it unlocks like a lot of things like privacy on the base layer, you know, like just private smart contracts and things like that. There might actually be a different precompile for some ZK stuff, but generally similar, you know, where we have the flexibility to add kind of things that a lot of people have wanted to see in the EVM that won't necessarily break backwards compatibility and like enable new use cases and things going forward from there.
Yeah, because it's definitely, to Kevin's first point about the stack depth of EVM being 1024 calls deep. It's like, you know, the original developers of Ethereum built this really cool system where you really can build anything. And they envisioned this, you know, ecosystem of many different apps that are composing on top of each other. And you realize like it's feasible to implement any functionality. For example, ERC20s, like those are implemented at the smart contract layer rather than the base layer, because they realized like, oh, we could actually just do that as an app. And ERC20 is actually just an app, just composing with other apps like Uniswap. So it was a really cool vision. And then it's just unfortunate that the practical limitations of, you know, because it's a global queue, a world computer, and everyone in the world is trying to use Ethereum at the same time. And, you know, there's only, you know, space for like 200-ish transactions in one block, and a block is only every 12 seconds. It just really means that the extent of that composability is really limited. So definitely a early objective of Monad to enable the existing apps, existing things and libraries, et cetera, that have been built already, and just, you know, take away the limitations of that are currently coming from the gas constraints that exist right now. But beyond that, the broader vision that Kevin outlined is also very, very much true to our heart here.
What's probably stuck out to me most there, what that you both mentioned, was the fact that the original Ethereum developers designed it so that you can build anything. Would you say I'm correct in surmising basically that Monad is an acceleration of that concept, enabling anyone to truly build anything without additional constraints that have been there for the past 10 plus years?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see where the limits hit, you know, at that point. But it's definitely sort of like going from the you know, gas powered cars to electric ones. Like all of a sudden you realize like, oh, it's possible to accelerate to 60 miles per hour in, you know, less than a second. Like it's just a completely different engine under the hood that enables a different spectrum of what's possible, and very excited to see what happens.
If I could piggyback here, because it actually goes back to the other point that I wanted to talk about, and it's all related, is like, you know, the original EVM was designed kind of like Keone said, in order to be able to stack a lot of things. And like, I think what we've seen in the EVM space so far is like, there's a lot of people who are really good at like solving an individual portion of the problem, right? And you see this with a lot of like ERCs and EIPs, is like, there's a really well thought out to like portion that like could maybe then be built upon, right? And so there's this landscape in the EVM where like there's a lot of existing code and a lot of existing products that like are pretty solid and fundamental and have been proven out. And yet there's like all this space on top of them that's just like untapped, right? And so I think that's like what's really exciting is like, okay, we have like, I think back during like DeFi summer, it was like money Legos was a thing, right? And we never really like saw that like flourish, right? Because like practically it just wasn't possible to. And so like having these like Legos from like existing EVMs that have been tested and being able to like compose on top of them, I think like the design space there is actually like much bigger than most people realize.
I think that's interesting. I'd love to, as a non-technical person, kind of hear you expand on what do you mean by that additional space that becomes available, and what potential do you have to do with that or build with that?
Yeah, I think like one really tangible example is just like lots of different types of like NFTs, right? And so you've seen like, the base primitive for the ERC20, which is then composed with like a DeFi contract, and now you have like finance, right? Maybe you have like an AMM and then the ERC20. Well, with like NFTs, we have like the base like ERC, like standards, 721 and 1155 and stuff. But there's also like a lot of other standards that like the only reason they haven't been adopted is like a distribution mechanism, right? Is like something that can actually like hot swap in these kind of like ERCs and understand them, right? So there's this design space right there that's like ripe for the taking, right? And I think there's just like a lot of like really well formulated base pieces within the EVM over a lot of other ecosystems today that we see in like a bunch of different ERCs, and like having a space that like you can actually like take those and compose and like put them on top of each other in like a really tangible way to like prove it out. Like, ERC 721 like got adopted quickly because the gas costs aren't that high and you can build products around it like pretty quickly, right? Now some of these like more advanced NFT standards that may have like in protocol royalty enforcement, like tracking for loyalty programs and all this stuff, like in a system where like the gas costs become prohibitively expensive, like you can't build a product around that and like prove it out, right? And so I think there's just like this really nice rich body of knowledge of like a bunch of people who are really ambitious and have already like spec this stuff out, and it just needs a product built around it to showcase it, to say, hey, look, like this is what blockchains can actually do.
Yeah, I think of it like basically whenever anyone has an idea and then they start to think through the logistics of it and they're like, oh, except for the gas costs. And there's just so many conversations that sort of end like that. Like if you wanted to build event ticketing, so like anytime, anyone goes to a concert, they get their ticket is actually just an NFT. That's pretty cool, because then now your memento of going to that Taylor Swift concert, also like you have that forever. And I know maybe Taylor Swift's a big enough name where you would actually just frame it or something, but like you go to a lot of other concerts and you want to have a little memento, not have it clutter up your house. But right now to actually build that on Ethereum would just be crazy. Like it would cost way too much in terms of gas to do that. And I think there are a lot of other ideas like that. So it's just like, in crypto, we're all, and I think I make this point often, but it's something I feel very strongly about. It's, we're all in crypto kind of dog fooding our own products right now. Like we're building, applications for, decentralized finance or personal finance. We're building these rails for settlement of financial transactions. And we're the first users of it. And a lot of the apps are actually quite good right now, but they would never scale to like the level of normal adoption because it'd just be way too expensive. So I think just, taking what exists right now and then like being able to scale that to many more users makes a lot of business models make a lot more sense. And then on top of that, just the effects of having everyone basically have a wallet where they have some assets that they can use to pay for things or store mementos or interact with games or interact with like sports betting or interact with other things that they normally do and have that all embedded like within a wallet, essentially. I think that ultimately can lead to an environment where crypto takes over the world in the way that like WeChat has to a great extent taken over China. And you in WeChat you can do anything. You can order like stuff from the equivalent of Amazon, or you can hire a repairman, or you can, I don't know. I actually don't have WeChat, so just from seeing friends use it, but like that's all possible in a decentralized manner, using a decentralized wallet, just using apps that are built on the rails that we have right now. We just need to make it a lot cheaper for people to do all of those things. So it's just a very simple, very basic thesis for what we think the world could look like in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, the thesis is basic, but it's powerful, and it really can't be understated. And now we're starting to get into a little bit of the app and product side of things. And one thing that's really stood out to me over the past few months is how many projects have come and pledged to build on Monad in these early stages prior to the test net and the main net. I would love to hear what type of applications and products you're most excited to see on Manat.
I think for me, the two areas are decentralized finance. So anything that enables people, like normal people, to manage their personal finances in a decentralized manner. So certainly money markets, decentralized exchanges, derivatives, oracles, at high fidelity and at high scale. And that's one vertical that I'm really personally excited about. When prior to Monad, or right before Monad, I was part of the crypto team at Jump. Jump was really involved in and excited about the Solana ecosystem because it just made sense. Like if fees are fractions of a cent and you could scale to millions of users, then you could actually have financial products that basically take the place of what existing incumbents currently do. And exchanges charge really high fees. Centralized exchanges charge really high fees. They charge really high fees for data. All of that can go away due to open markets with competitive forces that ultimately just drive the cost of those services down. But at the end of the day, like one of the things that we saw about Solana was that it's really awesome tech. It's come a long way, and it's come a long way since 2021 when James, our CTO, and I were involved in it, working on it. But the developer experience is still can be tricky just because it's not EVM compatible. So I think that's one specific vertical. And then the other one that I'll mention is just really excited about consumer facing apps. For example, sports betting, on-chain casinos, social, like basically anything that makes sense to do on your phone, like as a phone app, I think is something that's quite exciting as well.
If I could hop in here. Yeah, so what actually like brought me into blockchains a little bit was this idea of like data sovereignty, right? And I'm like really excited for a system where like an EVM system where you can do like context aware, like almost like internet sovereignty with cookies and data, right? And so a lot of these like native Web 2 experiences, and to be quite honest, I don't know if this is enough to move the needle of mass adoption, but it's something I personally would switch an app like to use if I knew like all my data was in my wallet, right? And then when I interact with this app, it surfaces content and stuff based on what's in my wallet, and because it's cryptographically secure, I'm more comfortable about putting more private information or more contextually aware things. And you can build like really native experiences where you show up into an app and like today NFT marketplaces are really kind of weird. Like it would be weird if you went to like a shopping website like Amazon and it doesn't show you like based on your history what you might be interested in, right? And like unlocking that in a way on blockchains is like only possible on blockchains. And like I'm really excited to see like experiences created around like the ability to like have that kind of like content tracking like on an individual level, which really does require like a chain with a lot of throughput and really low fees, because there's a lot of data there that you want to keep track of.
100%. And it seems like you've both had a similar approach to blockchain in general, seeing the value of a high throughput chain and how this could truly impact the usability of apps when you're looking at scale. And I know that you both have this experience across the Solana ecosystem. And it seems like there's also a lot of alignment in the core missions of Solana and Monad. Really trying to optimize that L1 and increase usability and throughput. So with that prior experience in mind, different as it was for both of you, what is it about the EVM that made you most excited to pursue the Monad route specifically?
I think for me, it's about building things that can ultimately help the highest number of developers scale. At the end of the day, Monad is a developer platform, so it's really important to go where the developers are and solve problems that are really pressing to them. I think that the pure EVM compatibility is part of solving those problems, but then there are other problems that are further on down the road, similar to like the directions that Kevin alluded to of making support for more cryptographic functions a lot easier, a lot cheaper. Things like increasing security of applications through behavioral changes to the VM that defend against reentrancy attacks if they're not desired by the developer, like some sort of flag that was toggled by the developer. Many things like that. So at the end of the day, it's just about solving problems that are blocking developers from building apps that get to number one on the iOS store. And for me, I felt that EVM was the place to do it. And it was kind of surprising that like there were not really people that were focusing on the execution stack. So just a very natural place to go work given our team's previous background, and then also given how urgently we felt the problem was in need of solving.
Yeah, I think for me personally, like, I was Solana core before this. And so like I like even before that, like, I was pilled into crypto through like the EVM community, essentially. Right. And I saw this like divergence of like actual, consumer facing use cases in the SVM and working on Solana, and where the EVM was going. And that's like somewhat concerning to me. Right. And so like Monad presents this like path where this, the ideals of the EVM and the Ethereum community that kind of pilled me into crypto in the first place, like have a chance to actually like reach product like scale, and like have that vision actually come to fruition, and not have to sit here and be like, well, I really love Ethereum's values and, the community. And even though I like Solana from like my background in engineering and like how I think systems should be designed, like that's a weird thing to hold in your head, right? And so Monad's this like really cool like combination where it's like, no, we can have these experiences, we can bring it to like a Monad, EVM, and essentially have EVM apps sit side by side against the Solana app and have a similar user experience. And then it's really just the developer's choice as to like where they want to build based on like the needs of their system, based on the different VMs. And we, there's like random little intricacies between the VMs that'll be important to certain types of devs. But like ideally, it would just be really like probably not healthy for crypto if like, SVM took over and EVM developers were like left behind, right? Especially when Ethereum like carries such mind share in the community, right? And so like working on a mission where like that can live side by side in like a vision where crypto is maximally successful and we have millions of users on chain, like that's pretty important and was pretty exciting.
Yeah, also collaboration is really important. So I think our team is aware of, the fact that we don't know the answers to everything. There's, we're specialists. We know a lot about building high performance parallel systems. We know a lot about BFT consensus. we know a lot about our very specific narrow problem, but there's a lot of other people that have put in a lot of effort into like more on the research side of Ethereum, and researching problems like MEV minimization and things. A lot of people have spent a lot of time thinking about governance, or a lot of people have spent a lot of time thinking about other cryptography. It just so many different directions. So I think it's also important to go where the standard is. That way, the work that you do is composable with other work that other people are doing. I think that's sort of where EVM is. EVM is a nexus of so much applied cryptography research, so much effort that's going into building apps, so much effort that's going into developing better security practices and automated fuzz testing and formal verification, just a lot of other stuff. It's really good to be where the standard is, and just to help. Like, I think, at least in 2022, there was this narrative of like, EVM sucks. Like the language is bad. Like there are all these deficiencies. Like we should move on from it. And I think that's, really echoing what Kevin said. If the community were to have that attitude pervasively, that would actually be very bad for crypto. So just got to help make the standard better and do the part that we know really well. And then also interface and trust a lot of other people that are doing good work and many other elements that interface with what we're doing.
Yeah, I think like it's like important to double click on like how good it is to have like a research community behind you, right? And like how much you can leverage. If you go look at like modern day like ZK research, it's all EVM based, right? And so like Keone said, like at Manat, we're able to scale the base layer and work on the things that we're really good at, but we also get like the benefit of not having to rebuild all the developer tooling, right? All the, if there is some like mind-blowing ZK, innovation, and all of a sudden we can do like fully stateless blockchains really quickly, like we'll be able to adopt it really quickly. This isn't like open research anymore. And so like having that like tailwind and that community to rely on is like can't be understated how important that is.
Yeah, I think that's clearly key, and certainly couldn't have put that better. Those were some of the things that I initially heard about Monad, at least on a high level, that really stopped me in my tracks and kind of motivated me to take another look and say, wow, this really is not just some other EVM chain. This is a full-on revamp with a lot of those similar value propositions coming out of Solana. But kind of going off that, so we've chosen the EVM as the best place to build, the best place to onboard developers. But within that, what is the biggest challenge of enabling builders in an EVM environment?
Oh, I think there are a couple. One is that for builders to attract funding, I think it's quite challenging right now still. I also think that the investor community is like very biased toward the US right now. So for international builders, it's really tough to get funding. These are things that we need to help address. I think that just in general, like building in a decentralized manner, building a decentralized app is more challenging from a security perspective. You're building something that is, at the end of the day, there's a ton of black hat hackers that are constantly probing for vulnerabilities and looking for an opening. So it's just a very challenging adversarial environment. We need better security practices, which include one thing that I'm excited about with Monad is by reducing gas costs substantially. We will make it so that it's, the trade-off that developers are currently making right now about whether to include additional defensive assertions that maybe check some invariant and make sure that it's true, but which cost more gas, like that is not a trade-off where they're erring on the side of fewer checks to save a little bit of gas. I think that's kind of in a crazy scenario right now. And we'll look back in the future. We'll look back at the security practices right now. and just feel like there was a lot more that could have been done if we hadn't been so constrained on gas. So I think those are some clear areas that I think are challenging for builders right now. But I think on the flip side, there is a very, I think it is amazing that the crypto community is so strong, and that, like if you're building a traditional tech startup, your Twitter would have no followers. Like, you would post updates and no one would care. And there would be no one that's like eager to go try out your product. You'd have to pull teeth just to get people to like try it out for free. And I think in crypto, the fact that we have such a strong community, that community is really a core part of the ethos, is actually a huge advantage that crypto has over the rest of this tech space, and a reason why crypto will ultimately be successful. So it's really just about leveraging the advantages and then minimizing the disadvantages, or equalizing out the disadvantages, and then we can scale as an industry.
Yeah, I think like a lot of Web2 developers, I think still have like a 2017, 2018 view of like what's possible on a blockchain, right? And so like being able to like present like examples of like real use cases, right, that have like a similar UX UI to like a Web2, I think like really does move the needle on like a lot of Web2 developers just like peeking over the fence and being like, okay, well, like I think the tech is maybe there now, right? And I think that that's going to be pretty important. I think about this problem a little bit in the realm of like how to keep developers on Monad, right? Because as an EVM, like you can kind of go anywhere. That's kind of the freedom. It's like one of the great parts. It's easy to raise. It's easy to move your app wherever you want to go. But like really enabling those experiences that like, well, you can't really move off Monad because this isn't possible anywhere else, because, maybe because of gas costs, maybe because of other things we do with the VM going forward and later. Just really like enabling like a UX UI experience that like puts blockchain development on the same level as like a Web2 developer, right? To where they can have an idea and like think of the value propositions that we've been thinking as like crypto natives for like a long time. And those things like actually being accessible now for real. And like, kind of proving that like, oh, like see this app and see how it uses and you don't even notice you're on a blockchain. Like putting that in the hands of a Web2 developer all of a sudden makes them go, oh, maybe I can build something here, because I think like as crypto, like we might be motivated a lot with like values or other like, really idealistic things that we want to build and see in the world. And like a lot of Web2 developers, they just want to build apps. And so those two views of the world, right, need to converge in some sense. And if we could enable them a place where like I'm just building an app is already, like that's a given. Right. And then from there, you can think about the experiences you can enable and like really what unique things you can build.
Yeah. Also, I feel like when the bull market comes around again, like there's going to be a ton of people that are excited about building things. Like it goes in cycles, and, yes, we're in a bear market right now, but when the bull market comes back, there's not going to be a shortage of people wanting to build things. The issue is more like, do we have all the pieces in place to support the builders that are really committed to go far? And can they actually build something that would actually scale to many users while still being very decentralized? And yeah, I think it's also about the industry just maturing. And I also, one thing I wanted to say also that I was just thinking about is like, over time, blockchains will get more performant. So I don't think, like I would not expect that like 10 years from now, Monad is unique from other blockchains because of performance. But it will be like right now, we set ourselves apart through performance and enabling something that's not possible elsewhere. And then over time, other systems will make additional improvements, or there will be cross-pollination of ideas or cross-pollination of actual technology. Whatever it is, will, ultimately move the space forward and enable more performant apps to be built. But then we're going to, like, our team is just going to keep pushing the limits of what's possible and introducing other support for new behaviors, new precompiles, new opcodes, and new integrations. We're just going to keep pushing the limits. It's like, I forgot what the phrase is, like the innovators. But yeah, there's a lot more innovation ahead. But you have to push the space forward right now. And then I think 10 years from now, what will set apart Monad from just other environments is a combination of the community and the killer apps that are built there, and the research community that evolves over time, and the commitment to pushing the limits from a technological perspective while maintaining a high degree of decentralization. And those are all that's what I see like in the long term. But at the very moment, the unique edge is execution performance that comes from rebuilding the execution stack from the ground up to enable parallelism, and doing something unique that has not been done before.
That's really exciting, and
Yes.
particularly that you have this two-faceted approach, right? It's like there's existing builders already in the EVM ecosystem, and they're really important. There's that research being done. Like, let's not let that go to waste to an extent. But there's also this focus, as kind of Kevin was mentioning, on new builders coming in from Web 2, making sure they have the correct perception of Web 3 and what's possible, especially with something like Monad. And what I've noticed is that it seems like a similar approach that you have for user acquisition as well as developer acquisition. And I want to share this tweet from Keone from a week or so ago, replying to Anatoly about the users on Monad. And the tweet is in agreement with Anatoly that the new environment should focus on new users primarily. Keone and Kevin, would love to hear you kind of expand on this and take us through why this is the case and how you're thinking about this.
Sure. I think the tweet was originally, someone was saying, well, I forget what it was, but Tolley basically said, most users probably not going to move over from Ethereum to Monad. Therefore, Monad is not a threat to Ethereum. And I agree with that. Well, first of all, the goal is not to threaten Ethereum. The goal is not to replace Ethereum. The goal is to do something different, to enable a different kind of mode of transactions that are much more plentiful, but much cheaper, and just ultimately enable new use cases that couldn't really exist within Ethereum or the Ethereum environment. But I think also, so that's point number one. But then point number two is that, realistically, for any high performance blockchain to actually get, full blocks or somewhat full blocks, it's actually going to require a lot of user acquisition. It's going to require a lot of new users. The key KPI for our team is really bringing new people into crypto, bringing new people using decentralized apps and decentralized tech. Because just moving over the existing ones isn't actually going to move the needle in terms of block space usage, because we're still in the very early innings of mass user adoption. So I think that at the end of the day, it's kind of a good situation where for any new environment, any new execution environment such as Monad, it's really on the team to go and find new users from Web 2, bring them on board, deliver compelling use cases that with killer apps that actually drive them to go adopt decentralized tech and jump through the hoops that exist right now. There are a lot right now with respect to user onboarding, like learning how to use a browser wallet, figuring out how to move funds from a centralized exchange or other fiat on-ramp to the actual wallet, learning how to secure your private keys. There's some significant hurdles right now. We and people that we collaborate with closely, such as teams that are working on better wallets or better user experiences or better fiat on-ramps, it's on us to actually crack that problem and bring on a lot of new users. So I think, the context probably helps with this tweet as well, to say like it was originally a discussion about Ethereum versus Monad, and I reject the question because at the end of the day, they're not competing. It's really about bringing new users on board But the reality of it is because that's what's required for Monad to actually succeed. Like if we don't bring any new users into crypto, we won't really have done anything meaningful. So yeah, just in general, those are some things that I think are important to say when it comes to that question.
Yeah, I think Keone covered it quite well there. I think I don't have a whole lot to add specifically, but on the same tweet thread, I think I was going back and forth with John Long a little bit, talking about like some of the use cases on Ethereum currently and how they're like actually like purpose built for Ethereum, like an AMM. And like that was a workaround for the fact that you couldn't build an order book, right? At the end of like our conversation, we get to this point where we're just like, well, this is great then, because like Monad is not competitive with Ethereum then, because like we're here to grow the not like split up the pieces. Right. And so it was a pretty cool like just little interaction to show that like it just very tangibly like showed that like yes, there are things that were like purpose built for the way Ethereum is built today, and like Monad is here to like expand that design space, right? Is to like make sure there's more buy to go around, not split up and fight over what is currently on the table.
Yeah, that's a really exciting and refreshing take for this space in particular, which is often so competitive and so cutthroat and moves so rapidly. Sometimes leaving good tech or good builders or good communities in the dust. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Keone, if you have something to add.
No, I was just my voice was a little hoarse, but I just said happy Thanksgiving with the pie analogy.
Yes. Right on. Cough, Monad. I think for a final question, one thing that really stood out to me was what you were saying previously, Keone, that it's not going to be performance that differentiates in 10 years, but it is now. And I think there's a lot of discussion on crypto Twitter regarding TPS as a metric in general, voting transactions. So my question is, when is TPS a valuable metric? And can you expand on the concept or the ratio of voting transactions and other transactions?
Yeah, I think the question about voting transactions is really because in Solana, the major block explorers sort of advertise the sum of the true TPS, which is transactions that are users swapping things on Jupiter or minting NFTs or what have you. But it also includes the actual votes from the validators voting on each block. Technically, because those are formulated as Solana transactions as well, one could group those into the total transaction count and advertise that as such. So I think right now roughly, this is like a little bit approximate, but the true TPS on Solana is about 500 transactions per second, which is still a huge amount. And then there's 2,500 votes every second as well, maybe more. So the sum of those two is 3,000. Yeah. So regarding the general measurement of TPS, we think it should be just counting the real transactions, the smart contract interactions, and the transfers that are happening on chain. We won't include votes in any TPS that we show. But yeah, it's in general, I think the question is also about like, how do you measure the performance of a blockchain? And right now, I think there's a lot of confusing metrics being thrown around where, for example, I think it's one of Aptos or Sui, they count a transaction as like an instruction. So like if there's a single, what we would think of as a transaction, like a single smart contract invocation that does several like sub instructions underneath it, they would count that as like 10 transactions. And that's not really right. So it's just, a very non-uniform space right now in terms of how different teams advertise the performance. The other thing that's confusing is the only thing you can really measure is the the number of transactions going through the system. But if the system's capacity is much higher than the current demand, then, if we're trying to compare technology stacks, maybe it would make sense to measure the max possible transaction throughput. But if at any given moment the system is not, under very much load, then the actual TPS that you can observe is much lower. So there's a lot of confusion there as well. And then when people try to solve that by, running their test net and showing loading up the test net with a lot of transactions, then there's questions around whether the test net is actually a true reflection of what the production environment would look like. So it's a very confusing topic. I think there's also a funny website. I forgot what it is, and I shouldn't even shout it out because it's bad. But it's like a website built by a Hedera person, and so it's like some etps something or other, and then Hedera's at the top with like 5,000, and then everything else is like 100. So anyway, it's like information wars right now still. But I think the true solution is to have reproducible benchmarks with a GitHub repo that each team contributes to and pushes a full script that defines like deploying a bunch of different servers around the world, and then actually the script would also like send a whole bunch of transactions to various nodes in the system and actually reproduce a full transaction throughput test. That's something that our team is planning on introducing, at least for Monad, but hopefully for some other competitive benchmarks as well. Just to similar to in scientific research, like you have to not only publish your results, but also publish the procedure that you use to generate those results so that people can replay that and reproduce them. That's really important to us. It's something that we intend on doing.
I think another like nuance here is like transactions on these different systems like are sized differently, right? And so I think in the case where you're just comparing simple transfers, that's probably like a very accurate comparison because you're only getting the overhead of whatever that system is plus the transaction payload of a simple transfer, which is a pretty good benchmark between blockchains. But for anything else than that, like in real world activity, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because there are Solana blocks with like 3 transactions in them because they're just like really heavy MEVs transactions, right? And so like it's really inaccurate to talk about like a transaction per second in that sense because like you don't know all the different things that are going into it. I think like if you're getting into like an in production system, like a better benchmark would just be like raw like bytes per second, like how many bytes per second can you propagate through the system. Because that abstracts away like a lot of these other things that get lost in this term of a transaction, which is like conditionally defined in every blockchain slightly differently.
Also wanted to mention in our case, the benchmark is the historical Ethereum transaction history. So we think that's a good, proxy for like what real life would look like. But totally agree that because the transactions could be very different, the actual composition of those transactions matters a lot.
It makes sense. I think that was a really nicely well-rounded explanation that certainly helped me understand a bit better that, this is a somewhat important metric, but it's often conflated or confused with other metrics, and that dilutes the effectiveness overall. But certainly Monad offering a lot of performance advantages to the EVM. And that's something that I'm personally really excited for. And I know the community is as well. So I'm very grateful to have had Keone and Kevin on here today. I'd love to give you each a moment to share any final thoughts if you have any, but thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Danny. Just really excited about the coming months, sharing more about the technology that our team has been building and showing the world what's possible with respect to really performant, really accelerated, parallel pipelined Ethereum virtual machine. Thanks.
I'll let Keone have the final word there. Thanks for having me on.
I'm grateful that you both came on. Thanks again, and hope to connect again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. Have a good rest.